Tonight, Los Angeles has joined the sad and worldwide fraternity of cities whose only membership requirement is to suffer the anguish of international terrorism. Approximately 2 hours ago, an unidentified group of men seized control of the Nakatomi building, sealing off all entrances and exits. All telephone lines have been cut. And the only communication now possible has been through the use of CB communicators, which the group apparently brought with them.
This video is made under the assumption that the viewer is familiar with Die Hard and no further spoiler warnings are necessary. After all, it is an established 80s classic. The 1988 Christmas action thriller from John McTiernan is widely understood to represent a kind of David versus Goliath story, in which John McClane is an everyman pitted against the nefarious schemes of a gang of Eurotrash terrorists. They are metaphorically representative of outside agencies that threaten the security of the world, too far-reaching and mysterious for the average Joe in America to do anything about, until now. But in truth, the more consistent message of the film is not that the little guy can defeat the powers that be, so much as it is the following: that a person ought to know his or her place, and not aspire to upward mobility. In the face of the very American value of ambition, this movie presents a case that one ought to be content with one's station, and not try to improve it. As much as this may be the story of an everyman cop who overcomes a seemingly insurmountable threat, it's also the story of a villain whose ambitions to rise to the top levels of wealth and status are thwarted. He must be stopped not because he's a villain, but rather he's a villain because he must be stopped from advancing in financial and social position. The key scene is that in which Gruber is finally defeated, and literally plummets from the heights he sought to achieve to his death. It's important to note that it isn't John McClane's bullet that finally sends him to his doom. It's Holly's watch. When John strips her of this symbol of her advancement, Hans too has no more pretensions to cling to and is destroyed. I assume you'll need convincing. Let's take a look at the events of the plot as they pertain to this question. When we meet John McClane, he's arriving in LA, and right away he's presented as feeling out of place, a normal guy in a land of the abnormal.
California.
He meets his limo driver, Argyle, and sits with him up front, refusing to adopt the affectation of privilege. When Argyle asks him about his situation and why he doesn't live with his wife Holly, John answers as follows.
Because I'm a New York cop. I got a 6-month backlog and New York scumbags I'm still trying to put behind bars. I can't just pick up and go that easy.
He knows who he is, what he's meant to do. His very identity is sewn up with his job and his status as a New York cop with obligations, and even though his marriage opens the opportunity for him to have a presumably better life, he isn't willing to trade off that station, even if it means losing his family. When he enters Nakatomi Plaza, he uses the fancy computer building directory to find his wife's listing, and is embarrassed to learn that she has dropped his surname. She has had herself listed under Holly Gennaro, her maiden name. It seems that being a McClane isn't good enough for her now that she's an executive. She's listed as being way up on the 30th floor, further signifying her distance and heightened status. Amusingly enough, the security guard who had him look her up also mentions that that's the only floor currently in use, implying he could have directed him there in the first place, but for no evident reason wanted John to jump the hoop of using the machine. Arriving on the 30th floor, John is immediately out of place in his plaid flannel shirt. He disapproves of the ostentation of the string quartet and finds the champagne he's been given not to his taste. It all smacks so falsely of wealth and power, values that he disdains. We get it. He's a working-class stiff, and that makes him our hero because we identify with how alien he finds the world of financial success. Yet Mr. Takagi, who's easily the most wealthy and powerful man in the film, also comes across unaffected. He's not concerned with status and even goes by Joe. He doesn't seem to judge John for his everyman clothes or lack of social grace. Instead, he tries to make him feel comfortable. He isn't a bad person for residing in a different social strata from John. He too knows who he is and is content with his station. All is as it ought to be, with nobody pretending to belong somewhere they're not in the financial hierarchy. We then meet Ellis, an empty suit obsessed with the trappings of success and a foil for Takagi. When introduced, he's snorting cocaine, and it is he who directs John's attention to Holly's watch, a Rolex presented to her as a sort of bonus for her good work, and a totem of her success.
John. that everyone?
Oh, we've been sticking him with spears. Of course he has. She was made for the business. Tough as nails.
I was hoping you made that flight.
Show him the watch.
Later.
Well, go on, show him. What are you, embarrassed? It's just a small token of appreciation for all our hard work. It's a Rolex. I'm sure I'll see you later. Is there a place where I could wash up?
Sure.
John isn't interested, and we in turn aren't shown the watch. In this moment of reconnection with his wife, her ambition and its fruits are set aside, for now irrelevant. But this foreshadows the climax of the film when it will become crucial. Once alone, the two argue about her decision to come to LA and accept an executive position, clearly a major upward move in her career.
We're going to have this
Remember, you didn't
conversation
waste
again.
much
We
time
did this in
getting out of
July.
We never finished this conversation
I had an
in July.
opportunity. I had to take it.
Right. No matter what the consequences, no matter what it did to our marriage.
With those lines, John admonishes Holly for valuing an improvement in station over her place as his wife in their family. She's wrong for pursuing the American dream. Then comes the threat, entering via the building's bowels, the supposed terrorists placed underground in contrast to the executives in their tower. We meet our villain, Hans Gruber, introduced to the highbrow chords of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. He's the man who will attempt the forbidden transition from loading dock to penthouse. He and his men arrive on the 30th floor as out of place as McClane. There's an explosion of violence as those not meant to be there penetrate the social gathering of those who are. John, an interloper of another kind, belongs to neither group and is physically separated from both. Hans Gruber assumes an air of authority and revels in both feeling like a big shot and being accepted as a superior by those cowering before him. He calls for calm as though it were perfectly reasonable for a man like him to be in charge and natural for others to fall in line.
Due to the Nakatomi Corporation's legacy of greed around the globe, they are about to be taught a lesson in the real use of power. You will be witnesses.
He asks for Mr. Takagi, whom he identifies by listing the executive's credentials. Once again, a character is equated with his position. Takagi is meant to lead. Gruber is not. His previous reference to real power becomes ironic, as once presented with Takagi, who's accustomed to wielding the kind of power Gruber seeks, he is reduced to an almost infantile, obsequious state.
Nice suit. John Phillips, London. I have two myself. Rumor has it Arafat buys his there.
He makes repeated appeals to impress Takagi with his erudition and taste, desperate for the approval of a man he seeks to supplant.
And when Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. Benefits of a classical education. I read the article in Forbes.
Once in the penthouse, over which Takagi rules, Gruber reveals his true motives, or so it seems. He's not a terrorist out to make a political statement. He's a thief out to steal money.
But I need the code key because I am interested in the $640 million in negotiable bearer bonds that you have locked in your vault. And the computer controls the vault.
Want money? What kind of terrorists are you?
Who said we were terrorists?
This identification is reinforced throughout the film.
After all your posturing, all your little speeches, you're nothing but a common thief.
I am an exceptional thief, Mrs. McClane.
So that's what this is all about? Fucking robbery?
It seems like what he's really after is the respect and admiration of those who possess wealth and power, acknowledgement as a peer. The money is just a means to an end. What he's really after is status. Instead of affirming Han's delusion of grandeur, Takagi refuses him the codes to steal the money, thus denying him his sought-after status and excluding him from the station that he seeks to occupy. So Hans murders him. He can't have the man's admiration, but he won't accept his contempt. But there's a fly in the ointment, John McClane, the man with no pretensions, no ambitions.
Who are you, then?
Just a fly in the ointment, Hans. The monkey in the wrench. A pain in the ass.
A man who doesn't want what he hasn't got is a threat to Hans, his nemesis. And so we get one of the most popular action movies of the 80s, in which the audience roots for the destruction of the man who had the gall to seek that which he was never meant to attain, respect. Now let's look at the supporting characters. Not everyone who's out of his proper place in this movie is attempting to leapfrog to a better position. We meet Sergeant Al Powell, who should probably be on a beat, but who's accepted a quiet desk posting and an undeserved lack of respect from those around him, due to a crisis of confidence. Just as the movie sees those aspiring improperly to high stations being brought down, it will also provide him an arc in which he comes into his own as a police officer and hero. Where once he'd used his firearm mistakenly, he now uses it to save lives.
Just stay calm. Everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine.
When Hans took control of the party at Nakatomi, it's worth noting that Ellis, a phony who doesn't belong in the role he's assumed, is the one least capable of dealing with the upset of normal affairs. This demonstrates why those who should be in his social and financial strata ought to be there. They are the ones capable of dealing with the unique strains of that status, just as John is capable of dealing with those of his.
The guy upstairs is fucking things up, huh? I can give him to you. Hey, John, I think you could get with the program a little, huh? The police are here now. It's their problem. Now tell these guys where the detonators are so no one else gets hurt. You know, I'm putting my life on the line for you, pal.
His attempt to deal on a level he's simply not suited to ultimately gets him killed.
Put Hans back on the line. Hans, this shithead does not know what kind of man you are, but I do. Listen to me.
Good. Then you'll give us what we want and save your friend's life. You're not part of this equation. It's time you realized that.
Hey, what am I, method actor Hans? Babe, put away the gun. This is radio, not television.
Hans, this asshole is not my friend. I just met him tonight. I don't know him. Jesus Christ, Ellis, these people are gonna kill you. Tell them you don't know me.
John, how can you say that after all these years, huh? John. John.
Monica, I can get us a table. Wolfgang and I are very close friends.
Another pretender is Thornburg, a reporter with ambitions to rise above his place as an unimportant cog in a local news station. Like Gruber, he's willing to take shortcuts to success, which in itself is sufficient to indicate that he doesn't deserve the advancement.
Sam, all right, look, Sam, I tell you what. You don't want to give me a truck? I'll go and I'll steal a truck.
Hey, give us a break, Thornburg.
Eat it, Harvey.
Although he could be viewed as a little guy taking on a big machine, like McClane, his ambition marks him as a villain, and he'll endanger McClane's family by putting their faces on the news.
Mrs. McClane.
At the story's close, he receives a much-deserved punch in the face from Holly.
This is Deputy Chief of Police Dwayne T. Robinson, and I am in charge of this situation.
The Deputy Chief of Police, Dwayne T. Robinson, represents an interesting case. Notice that his blustery pretensions upon taking command make him an obstacle for our heroes and an object of ridicule.
If there's hostages, how come nobody's come to us with ransom demands, huh? If there's terrorists in there, where's their list of demands? All we know is that somebody shot your car up. It's probably the same silly son of a bitch you've been talking to on that radio.
Excuse me, sir. But what about the body that fell out the window?
Well, who knows? It's probably some stockbroker got depressed.
Yeah, sir. The FBI's here.
Oh, the FBI is here now?
Yes, sir. Right over there.
Hold this.
Want a breath, man?
But when stripped of ostentation by the FBI, our contempt shifts to them, and he becomes more sympathetic, finding his proper place outside the circle of decision-making.
I'm Dwayne Robinson, LAPD. I'm in charge here. Not anymore.
Say, listen, would it be possible for you to turn off Grid 212?
Are you crazy?
Maybe I should call the mayor on this. You know?
Hey, no.
I don't like this, Sarge.
Things briefly take on a racially significant edge as Argyle stops Theo, the black criminal, for his attempt at unearned wealth. Sure, he's a computer genius and Argyle's just a limo driver, but by that very contrast, Argyle's understood to be the better man, the one acting in accordance with his assigned station. And so the less educated, less skilled black man eliminates the threat of the more skilled and ambitious one. And audiences cheer. The irony of all this is that Gruber and his men are good at what they do and well-financed. Under different circumstances, they ought to be able to achieve quite a lot if they hadn't chosen a criminal route to self-advancement. Notice that McClane takes a moment to state that Gruber might have been a good cowboy in his own right, and acknowledge the man's qualities, tragically misdirected by his ambitions.
You made a pretty good cowboy yourself, Hans.
Oh, yeah. What was it you said to me before? Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Although taking possession of the upper limits of the building, and by inference the moneyed status that he'll possess once escaped, Hans Gruber didn't earn his elevated position. One might argue that it is this that makes him deserving of his fate, and the denial of his goal of upward mobility. But Holly did earn her improved place, yet had to sacrifice it anyway, returning to her identity as John's wife and reconciling with him to save herself from the perils of adopting a role meant for people like Takagi, and not suited to a McClane.
That was my wife, Holly. Holly Gennaro.
Holly McClane.
Is any of this deliberate? Probably not. I'm sure McTiernan and company thought in terms of honest people in contrast with those seeking unearned promotion. McClane makes that famous apology by radio where he says he should have supported his wife's progress after all. However, the body of the film conflicts with this and speaks to unnamed biases and unacknowledged ideas that all declare career advancement to be a sign of villainy. In the end, family and identity with one's assigned station in life is equated with contentment, and ambition with punishment. It's a movie that says to be what you're expected to be, take no unnecessary chances, and everything will be okay.
The lesson is never try.